20. As was his wont, Obolonsky did not spend his time idly while in Petersburg. Besides business, his sister's divorce and his post, it was as usual necessary for him, as he said, to refresh himself in Petersburg after the mustiness of Moscow. Moscow, despite its cafés chantant and its omnibuses, was still a stagnant pool. Obolonsky always felt this. After living in Moscow, especially in the bosom of his family, Obolonsky always felt his spirits flag. When he had spent a long time in Moscow without a break, he reached a state in which he began to be upset by his wife's ill humor and reproaches, by the health and education of the children, and the petty details of his work. Even the fact that he was in debt worried him then. But he only needed to spend some time in Petersburg, among the set in which he moved, where people lived, really lived, instead of vegetating as in Moscow, and at once all these cares vanished and melted away like wax before a fire. His wife? Only that day he had been talking to Prince Tchetchensky. He had a wife and family with grown-up sons who were pages at the court, and another family, an illegitimate one, in which there were other children. Though the first family was all right, Prince Tchetchensky felt happier with the second family. He took his eldest son to visit the second family, and told Obolonsky that he considered it developed his son and was good for him. What would he say to that in Moscow? Children? In Petersburg, children did not hinder their father's living. Children were brought up in educational establishments, and there were none of those barbaric views that were becoming so prevalent in Moscow. Lvov's was a case in point, that the children should have every luxury, and the parents nothing but work and worry. Here, people understood that a man must live his own life like a civilized being. The service. Service too was not here that strained, hopeless drudgery that it was in Moscow. Here, there was an interest in the service. Meeting the right person, a service rendered, a felicitous remark, the ability to perform certain tricks, made a man's career in a moment, as was the case with Bryantsov, whom Obolonsky had met the day before, and who was now a great dignitary. Service of that kind had an interest. But it was the Petersburg outlook on money matters that had a particularly soothing effect on Obolonsky. Botniansky, who spent at least 50,000 rubles a year at the rate he was living, had the day before made a notable remark to him on the point. As they were having a chat before dinner, Obolonsky had said to Botniansky, "You are, I think, intimate with Mordvinsky. You could do me a good turn if you would put in a word for me. There's a post I should like to get. Member of the agency. Never mind the name, I shouldn't remember it. But why do you want to mix in those railway concerns, with Jews? Look at it how you like, it's horrid." Obolonsky did not tell him that it was a live business. Botniansky would not have understood that. "I am hard up, have nothing to live on." "But you do live." "Yes, but in debt." "Really? Is it much?" asked Botniansky sympathetically. "Very much, about 20,000 rubles. Botniansky burst into merry laughter. "Ah, you lucky fella," he cried. "My debts amount to 1,000,000, and I have nothing. But as you see, I'll still find it possible to live." Obolonsky knew this to be true, not only from hearsay, but from actual fact. Shivachov, whose debts amounted to 300,000 rubles, didn't possess a penny, and yet he lived, and how he lived. Count Krivtsov, whose case had long been considered hopeless, still kept 2 mistresses. Petrovsky had run through 5 millions, continued living in just the same style, and even directed the finance department, and received a salary of 20,000. But, apart from that, Petersburg acted pleasantly on Obolonsky physically. It made him younger. In Moscow, he sometimes noticed some grey hairs, fell asleep after dinner, stretched himself, walked slowly upstairs, breathing heavily, felt dull among young women, and did not dance at balls. In Petersburg, he always felt that he had shaken off 10 years. In Petersburg, he felt what the 60-year-old Prince Peter Obolonsky, who had just returned from abroad, had described to him only the day before. "Here we don't know how to live," Peter Oblonsky had said. "Would you believe it? I spent the summer in Baden and really felt quite like a young man. I see a young woman and my fancy. I dine, drink a little, and feel strong and full of spirits. I returned to Russia and had to be with my wife, and in the country besides, and in a fortnight I took to a dressing gown and gave up dressing for dinner. And as to thinking about young women, why, I turned into quite an old man. There was nothing left for me but to think of saving my soul. Then I went to Paris and again recovered." Stephen experienced just the same difference as Peter Oblonsky. In Moscow, he let himself to go to such an extent that, had he continued to live that long, he might even have come to the soul-saving stage. But in Petersburg, he again felt quite a smart fella. Between the Princess Betsy Tverskaya and Oblonsky, there existed long-established and very peculiar relations. Oblonsky, in fun, always paid court to her, and told her the most indecent things also in fun, knowing that she liked that more than anything. The day after his interview with Karenina, Oblonsky, calling on her, felt so youthful that he went accidentally to such lengths in this bantering courtship and humbug that he did not know how to get out of it, for unfortunately she was not merely unattractive, but actually repulsive to him. This tone had sprung up between them because he was very attractive to her, so he had been very pleased when the Princess Myakaya turned up and put an end to their tete-a-tete. "Ah, so you're here," she said on seeing him. "Well, how's your poor sister?" "Don't look at me like that," she asked. "Since everyone has been attacking her, all those who are 100,000 times worse than she, I thought she has acted splendidly. I can't forgive Vronsky for not letting me know when she was in Petersburg. I would have gone to her, and with her everywhere. Please give her my love. Well, tell me about her." "Yes, her situation is a hard one," Oblonsky began, in the simplicity of his heart, taking the Princess Myakaya's words for genuine coin, when she said, "Tell me about her." But the Princess Myakaya immediately interrupted him, as was her habit, and commenced telling her own tale. "She has done what everybody, except myself, does secretly, and she would not deceive, and has acted splendidly. And the best thing she did was to leave that half-witted brother-in-law of yours. Excuse me, everyone used to say, 'He's so clever, so clever.' I alone said that he was stupid. Now that he's got so chummy with Lydia Ivanovna and Landau, everyone says he's half-witted, and I should be glad not to agree with everybody, but this time I can't help it." "But do explain to me what it means," said Oblonsky. "Yesterday I called on him about my sister's affair, and asked him for a definite answer. He did not give me an answer, but said he must think it over, and this morning, instead of an answer, I have received an invitation for this evening to go to the Countess Lydia Ivanovna's." "Ah, that's it," Princess Myakaya began joyfully. "They will ask Landau and see what he says." "Ask Landau? Why, who is Landau?" "What? You don't know Jules Landau? Le fameux Jules Landau, le clairvoyant? He also is half-witted, but your sister's fate depends on him. See what comes of living in the provinces. You know nothing. Landau, you see, was a commis in Paris, and went to see a doctor. He fell asleep in the doctor's waiting room, and while asleep began giving advice to all the patients, and very strange advice too. Afterwards, Yuri Melidinky's wife, the invalid's wife, you know, heard of that Landau, and took him to see her husband. He's treating her husband. No good has been done, in my opinion, for he is still just as weak, but they believe in him, and take him about with him. So they brought him to Russia. Here everyone rushed at him, and he began treating everybody. He cured the Countess Bezubova, and she took such a fancy to him that she adopted him." "Adopted? How?" "Simply adopted him. He's now no longer Landau, but Count Bezubov. However, that's not to the point. But Lydia, I'm very fond of her, but her head is not screwed on right. Naturally it has rushed at this Landau, and now nothing is settled either by her or by Karenin, without him. So your sister's fate is now in the hands of this Landau, alias Count Bezubov. 21. After an excellent dinner and a large quantity of brandy at Bartniansky's, Oblonsky, only a little after the appointed time, entered the Countess Lydia Ivanovna's house. "Who is with the Countess? The Frenchman?" Oblonsky asked the hall porter, noticing on the hall stand Karenin's overcoat, which he recognized, and a strange, absurd-looking paletot with clasps. "Alexis Alexandrovitch Karenin and Count Bezubov," the hall porter replied severely. "The Princess Miaskaya guessed correctly," thought Oblonsky as he ascended the stairs. "Strange. But it would be just as well to make friends with her. She has tremendous influence. If she would say a word to Pomorsky, the job is done." It was still quite light out of doors, but in the Countess Lydia Ivanovna's small drawing-room the blinds were down and the lamp alight. At the round table beneath the lamp sat the Countess and Karenin, conversing in low tones. A short, lean man, with hips like a woman's, knock-kneed, very pale, handsome, with beautiful shining eyes and long hair that hung over the collar of his frock coat, stood at the opposite end of the room, looking at the portraits on the wall. After greeting the hostess and Karenin, Oblonsky involuntarily glanced at the stranger once more. "Monsieur Landau," the Countess addressed him with a softness and caution that struck Oblonsky, and she introduced them. Landau hurriedly looked around, approached smilingly, laid upon Oblonsky's outstretched hand his own moist and motionless one, went back, and continued looking at the portraits. The Countess and Karenin glanced at each other significantly. "I'm very pleased to see you, especially today," said the Countess Lydia Ivanovna, pointing to a seat beside Karenin. "I introduced him to you as Landau," she said softly, glancing at the Frenchman and then back at Oblonsky. "But really he is Count Bezubov, as you probably know. But he does not like that title." "Yes, I've heard," replied Oblonsky. "They say he has completely cured the Countess Bezubov." "She called on me today and was so pathetic," said the Countess, turning to Karenin. "This separation is dreadful for her. It is such a blow to her." "Is he going definitely?" inquired Karenin. "Yes, he's going to Paris. He heard a voice yesterday," said the Countess, with a look at Oblonsky. "Ah, a voice," Oblonsky remarked, feeling that he must be as careful as possible in this company, where something peculiar occurred, or was supposed to occur, to which he, as yet, lacked a clue. After a momentary pause, the Countess Lydia Ivanovna, as if coming to the important point, turned with a subtle smile to Oblonsky. "I've known you a long time, and I'm very pleased to know you more intimately. The friends of our friends are our friends. But to be a friend, one must enter into the state of the friend's soul, and I fear you will not do so in relation to Alexis Alexandrovitch. You understand what I'm speaking about?" she said, lifting her beautiful dreamy eyes. "To some extent, Countess, I understand that Alexis Alexandrovitch's position," said Oblonsky, not quite grasping what it was all about, and therefore wishing to keep to generalities. "The change is not in his external position," Lydia Ivanovna said severely, as her enamoured eyes followed Karenin, who had risen and joined Landau. "His heart has changed. He has been given a new heart, and I fear that you may not have realized fully that change which has been accomplished within him." "Well, broadly speaking, I can picture to myself the change. We've always been friendly, and now," Oblonsky said, answering her look with a tender gaze, while he considered with which of two ministers she was the more closely connected, so as to judge which of them he should ask her to influence on his behalf. "The change that has taken place in him cannot weaken his love for his neighbour. On the contrary, that change must strengthen his love. But I fear you don't understand me. Won't you have some tea?" she said, indicating with her eyes the footman, who was handing tea round on a tray. "Not quite, Countess. Of course his misfortune—" "Yes, a misfortune which has turned into a great blessing, because his heart became new and is filled with him, she said, glancing at Oblonsky with love-sick eyes. I think I might ask her to mention me to both, thought he. Oh, certainly, Countess, he said, but I think such changes are so very intimate that nobody, not even the closest friend, cares to speak about them. On the contrary, we must speak, and so help one another. Yes, of course, but there are such differences of conviction, and besides, said Oblonsky with a gentle smile, there cannot be any differences in what concerns the holy truth. Oh, no, of course not, but... And, becoming embarrassed, Oblonsky stopped short. He realized that it was a question of religion. It seems to me he will fall asleep directly, said Karenina in a significant whisper, approaching Lydia Ivanovna. Oblonsky turned. Landau was sitting by the window, leaning against the arm and back of an easy-chair, with his head hanging down. Noticing the looks directed toward him, he smiled a childishly naive smile. Take no notice of him, said Lydia Ivanovna, and with an agile movement she pushed forward a chair for Karenina. I have noticed, she began, when a footman entered with a note. Lydia Ivanovna rapidly read the note, and, excusing herself, with extreme rapidity, wrote and dispatched the answer, and returned to the table. I have noticed, she continued her interrupted sentence, that Muscovites, men especially, are most indifferent to religion. Oh no, Countess, I think Muscovites have the reputation of being the most steadfast believers, replied Oblonsky. But, as far as I know, you unfortunately are one of the indifferent, Karenina remarked to him with a weary smile. How can one be indifferent? Said Lydia Ivanovna. I am in this respect not precisely indifferent, but rather expectant, said Oblonsky with his most mollifying smile. I do not think that for me the time for those questions has yet come. Karenina and Lydia Ivanovna exchanged looks. We never know whether our time has come or not, Karenina said sternly. We should not consider whether we are ready or not. Grace is not influenced by human calculations. Sometimes it does not descend on those who seek it, but descends on the unprepared, as on Saul. No, not yet, I think, said Lydia Ivanovna, who was watching the Frenchman's movements. Landau rose and came up to them. You will allow me to listen? He asked. Ah, yes. I did not wish to disturb you, said Lydia, looking tenderly at him. Sit down beside us. Only one must not shut one's eyes, so as to deprive oneself of light, Karenina continued. Oh, if only you knew the happiness we experience, feeling his continual presence in our souls, cried the Countess Lydia Ivanovna with a beatific smile. But one may sometimes feel incapable of ascending to such heights, remarked Oblonsky, conscious that he was not quite honest in acknowledging the existence of religious heights, yet not venturing to confess his skepticism in the presence of one who, by a single word to Pomorsky, might secure him the desired post. You mean to say he is prevented by sin? Said Lydia Ivanovna. But that is a false view. Sin does not exist for a believer. Sin has already been atoned for. Excuse me, she added, glancing at the footman who entered with another note. She read it and answered by word of mouth. Tell him, tomorrow at the Grand Duchess's. For those who believe, there is no sin, she went on. Yes, but faith without works is dead, said Oblonsky, recalling that sentence from the Catechism, and only by a smile maintaining his independence. There it is, from the Epistle of St. James, said Karenina, addressing Lydia Ivanovna in a somewhat reproachful tone. Evidently, this was a point they had discussed more than once. How much harm has been done by a false interpretation of that passage? Nothing turns so many from the faith as that interpretation. I have no works, and therefore cannot have faith. Yet it is not so said anywhere, just the contrary is said. To labor for God with works, to save one's soul, by fasting, said the Countess Lydia Ivanovna with fastidious disdain. Those are the barbarous opinions of our monks. Yet it is not so said anywhere. It is much simpler and easier, she added, looking at Oblonsky with the same encouraging smile with which at court she encouraged young maids of honor who were confused by their new surroundings. We are saved by Christ, who suffered for us. We are saved by faith. Karenina chimed in, showing his approval of her remark by a look. Vous comprenez l'anglais? Asked Lydia Ivanovna, and having received an affirmative answer, she rose and began looking among the books on a shelf. I want to read Safe and Happy, or Under the Wing, she said with a questioning look at Karenina. And having found the book and sat down again, she opened it. It is quite short. It describes the way to acquire faith, and the joy, higher than anything else on earth, with which it fills the soul. A believer cannot be unhappy, because he is not alone. But you will see. She was about to begin reading when the footman came in again. Borozdina? Say, tomorrow at 2. Yes, she went on, keeping her finger in the book to mark the place, and sighed, looking with her beautiful dreamy eyes straight before her. This is how true faith acts. You know Mary Sanina? You have heard of her misfortune? She lost her only child. She was in despair. Well, and what happened? She found this friend, and now she thanks God for her child's death. That is the happiness faith gives. Ah, yes, it is very... began Oblonsky, glad that she was going to read and give him time to get his ideas together. No, evidently it will be better not to ask her anything tonight, he reflected. Only let me get away from here without making a mess of things. It will be dull for you, said the Countess Lydia Ivanovna, turning to Landau, as you don't understand English, but it is quite short. Oh, I shall understand, replied Landau with the same smile, and closed his eyes. Karenina and Lydia Ivanovna exchanged significant looks, and the reading began. 22. Oblonsky felt completely puzzled by the strange and novel language he was listening to. Generally, the complications of Petersburg life had an exhilarating effect on him, lifting him out of the Moscow stagnation. But he liked and understood complications in spheres congenial and familiar to him. In these strange surroundings, he felt puzzled and dazed and could not take it all in. Listening to the Countess Lydia Ivanovna, and feeling the fine eyes, naive or roguish, he did not know which, of Landau fixed upon him, Oblonsky began to be conscious of a peculiar sort of heaviness in his head. The most varied ideas were mixed up in his mind. Mary Sanina is glad that her child is dead. I should like to have a smoke. To be saved, one need only have faith. The monks don't know how to do it, but the Countess Lydia Ivanovna knows. And what is so heavy in my head? Is it the brandy, or is it because all this is so very strange? All the same, I think I have not done anything to shock them up till now. But still, it won't do to ask her help now. I have heard that they make one pray. Supposing they make me pray? That would be too stupid. And what nonsense she is reading. But her enunciation is good. Landau Bezubov. Why is he Bezubov? Suddenly Oblonsky felt his nether jaw dropping irresistibly for a yawn. He smoothed his whiskers to hide the yawn, and gave himself a shake. But then he felt himself falling asleep, and nearly snored. He roused himself just when the Countess Lydia Ivanovna uttered the words, "He's asleep." Oblonsky awoke in a fright, feeling guilty and detected, but he was immediately comforted by noticing that the words, "he is asleep," did not apply to him, but to Landau. The Frenchman had fallen asleep, just as Oblonsky had done. But whereas Oblonsky's sleep would, he imagined, have offended them, he did not really even think this, for everything seemed so strange. Landau's sleep delighted them extremely, especially Lydia Ivanovna. "Mon ami," said she, carefully holding the folds of her silk dress to prevent its rustling, and in her excitement calling Karenina not Alexis Alexandrovitch, but mon ami. Donnez-lui la main. Vous voyez? Hush, she said to the footman, who came in again. I am not receiving. The Frenchman slept, or pretended to sleep, leaning his head against the back of the chair, and his moist hand lying on his knee moved feebly, as if catching something. Karenina rose, and though he tried to be cautious, he caught against the table. He went up to the Frenchman and placed his hand in his. Oblonsky also rose and, opening his eyes wide to wake himself up in case he was asleep, looked first at one and then at the other. It was all quite real, and Oblonsky felt his head getting worse and worse. Let the person who arrived last, the one who questions, go out. Let him go out, the Frenchman said, without opening his eyes. You must excuse me, but you see, come back at about 10, or better still, tomorrow. Quelle sorte? Repeated the Frenchman impatiently. C'est moi, n'est-ce pas? And having received an answer in the affirmative, Oblonsky, forgetting the request he had wanted to make to Lydia Ivanovna, forgetting his sister's affairs, and with the one desire to get away from there as quickly as possible, went out on tiptoe, and ran out into the street as from an infected house. After which he talked and joked for a long time within his voschik, trying to regain his senses as soon as possible. At the French theatre, where he arrived in time for the last act, and afterwards at the Tartar restaurant, where he had some champagne, Oblonsky was able to some extent to breathe again in an atmosphere congenial to him, but nevertheless he was not at all himself that evening. When he returned to Peter Oblonsky's house, where he was staying, he found a note from Betsy. She wrote that she greatly wished to finish the conversation they had begun, and asked him to call next day. Scarcely had he finished reading the note, and made a wry face over it, when he heard downstairs the heavy steps of men carrying something heavy. He went down to see what it was. It was Peter Oblonsky, grown young again. He was so drunk that he could not get up the stairs, but on seeing Oblonsky, he ordered the men to put him on his feet, and, clinging to Stephen, he went with him to his room, began relating how he had spent the evening, and fell asleep there. Oblonsky was in low spirits, a thing that rarely happened to him, and could not fall asleep for a long time. Everything he recalled was nauseous, but most repulsive of all, like something shameful, was the memory of the evening at Lydia Ivanovna's. Next day he received from Karenina a definite refusal to divorce Anna, and understood that this decision was based on what the Frenchman had said the evening before, in his real or pretended sleep.